Okay, so the article I've chosen for my assignment is called Grading. The issue is not how but why, and it's by Alfie Kohn. So, Alfie Kohn is a popular author and speaker, and he talks about topics such as education, parenting, and behavior. And he's often critical of sort of the traditional way things are done, saying that a lot of these things, such as homework, the way evaluation and assessment's done, rewarding students for good behavior and punishing bad behavior, that those things aren't really supported by contemporary research. So, the main idea of his article is that he breaks down the way assessment and evaluation is talked about into sort of three different categories in increasing levels of sophistication. So the lowest level is just talking about how should we grade. So these are things such as making assignments fair, making sure that, for example, two teachers teaching the same course, making sure that students would have an equal grade in each one, questions like that. The second level, which is a little bit more sophisticated, is saying what should we grade? And in this he sort of talks about the idea of authentic assessment and making sure that the assessment is really looking at things that are valuable and that we're assessing the right things. But what he really gets into in this article is the third level, which is why do we even grade at all? And so that's what the rest of it will talk about. So he gives three different ideas of the rationale for grading assignments or assessments. The first one is for sorting. So that's the idea of ranking students, deciding who's the top of the class, who's the bottom of the class, deciding who gets into university or other post-secondary education, things like that. The second reason would be motivation. So that's the idea that when you grade students, they will be motivated to do better because they want to get better grades. And the third idea is feedback. So that's the idea that when you mark something, you should actually be giving good descriptive feedback so that students can improve. And the idea being that if they get feedback on one assignment, they'll then do better on the next one because they know what they did well and what they need to work on. So at the end, he sort of breaks it down into some ideas that educators should consider when they're doing assessment. So assessment of any type shouldn't be overdone. So no matter what the quality is of your assessment, he's basically saying that too much of it is a bad thing. Secondly, that observing student behavior is the best evidence. So rather than having students write an essay, do a test or something, which is sort of an unrealistic situation, it's better to watch them doing something like making arguments, building something more creative, and see how they interact. The third thing, students should play a role in determining assessment criteria. And then sort of lastly, don't grade on a curve and don't give a separate grade for effort. And I think that last point's kind of interesting. I'll come back to that at the end. So if we look at the growing success document, it's sort of it sort of has a pretty strong opinion on the question of why do we grade or why do we do assessment. And it says the primary purpose of assessment and evaluation is to improve student learning. So that would be sort of the third idea of his. So rather than for sorting or for motivation, it's the idea of giving feedback so that students can improve. So what I'm going to do now is just look at each of those points that he gave as advice and see if we can link them somehow to growing success. So the first one is assessment of any type shouldn't be overdone. And growing success says that assessment should be varied in nature. And growing success doesn't really say anything about the number of assessments that should be done, but it does say that, or at least alludes to the fact that you shouldn't do too much of any one type of assignment. So this is things like, you shouldn't have a whole bunch of essays, a whole bunch of quizzes or similar types of things, but rather to give students a variety of different assessment types. Observing behavior is the best evidence, according to Alfie Kohn. And in growing success, they don't necessarily say it's the best, but they certainly say it's important because it says that teachers should use a variety of information, which could include observations, discussions, learning conversations, and questioning. So not just written assignments or tests. Students should play a role in determining assessment criteria. This one's very clear in Growing Success. It says that students need to develop self-assessment skills, and this is sort of the idea of assessment as learning or assessment for learning, as opposed to just assessment of learning. Don't grade on a curve. Again, Growing Success is very clear on this. It says that Ontario has criterion referenced assessment, not norm referenced, which means you set a standard, and if students meet it, then that determines what grade they get, as opposed to norm referenced where they're compared to other students. Now, this last point is interesting because Growing Success disagrees with it. Aflie Kohn says not to give a separate grade for effort, and Growing Success says that you do, in fact, give separate grades for learning skills. So, I mean, it doesn't have one that explicitly says effort, but I think if you sort of combine initiative and responsibility, that to me looks like you're giving a grade for a student on effort. So I think it's kind of interesting that they don't necessarily agree on this point. So as for reflections, I think a lot of these points are very valuable, and I've seen some of them work with great success on my placements. In particular, on my first placement in the elementary school, I had an English project that I assigned to the students. They were to write a narrative story. And rather than give written feedback or a grade, one of the things I did with them is I had a personal interview with each student, and I talked about what I liked about their story, what I thought they could improve on. And I think the kids were much more receptive to sort of criticism of their story when it wasn't associated with a mark. And the fact that I just told them what I wanted changed without assigning a mark made them maybe more likely to do it. And I think I'll probably continue to do things like that when I'm teaching. It might be a little harder to adapt to math, but I think it's definitely a good idea and worth keeping in mind.